So to make your gluten-free pizza dough, we're going to first start off with preparing our wet mixture. Now, with using gluten-free flour or gluten-free alternatives, we have to remember that there is no gluten here or anything holding onto the gas as our yeast does its work, starts feeding on our starches and will outgas. So that's what gives us nice fluffy bread, is the proteins in wheat or gluten. So we need to start using some ingredients that's going to replace the function of gluten when making gluten-free bread to have something that's going to taste good. So what we need to do first is I have prepared, we're doing two mixtures today. We're going to do an artisanal pizza dough and then just the basic one. So let's just do the basic one first. So I have prepared my water here and it's just at room temperature. And to that, we're going to be starting to add, as I mentioned, some of those ingredients that are going to replace the gluten in our dough. So the first one being psyllium husk. Now I like to grind my psyllium husk into a powder, or you can purchase it already in a powder. We're going to sprinkle that into our water. Now in addition to that, we are using the Panacea whole egg replacer. Now there is in your recipe, you can alternatively add more psyllium husk. However, if you do have this product, I highly recommend it. It is going to replace the 8 major functions of eggs and also incorporate a lot of moisture, great texture to our gluten-free dough. So just pop that straight in as well. In addition to that, we also have some glucose syrup. And the glucose syrup is again going to help keep moisture retention in our dough. Have you ever had a gluten-free bread or bread product that's very dry? The glucose syrup is going to assist with keeping our dough moist. And last but not least, we have our almond meal, or you can use a plant milk powder like soy milk powder or something like that. And this again is just going to assist with creating desirable textures in our gluten-free dough. Now I'm going to blend all of this together. And now we have our yeast, so I'm going to sprinkle that in. Just give that a mix. And we're going to set this aside for about 10 to 15 minutes, just for that yeast to start activating. And in the meantime, I'm going to prepare my second batch. So my second batch, again, we have our psyllium husk, Panacea. Instead of the glucose syrup, I am using some molasses just to give some additional flavor. Almond meal, or your plant milk powder. And again, let's blend this up. And now I'm going to add my yeast. So you can use fresh yeast like I am using, or the dry yeast, and you'll find the measurements in your recipe. Now when working with gluten-free dough, you will probably notice, if you're familiar with making breads, that gluten-free bread products tend to use more yeast. So this is normal, and the reason that we add more yeast is again because we don't have that gluten in the flour that we're using. So we want to kind of buffer that with adding additional yeast to get a little bit more lift. All right, so we're going to set these guys aside for about 10-15 minutes and then come back to mix everything together. So our wet mixture with that psyllium husk and Panacea and all our other ingredients in the yeast has been hydrating for about 10 to 15 minutes. Now we're going to add it to our dry ingredients. So in my bowl here, I just have some all-purpose gluten-free flour, and you can use any one that you have in your supermarket. This was the brand that I had, the Scar brand, and this is just their all-purpose gluten-free flour. So that's what I've used for my dough, in addition to some salt, some sea salt. Just make sure, check your gluten-free flour just to ensure that it doesn't contain salt. If it does contain salt, then you can just omit or reduce the salt content. In my other bowl here for like our artisanal style gluten-free dough, we have our portion of gluten-free all-purpose flour, and I also have a little bit of millet flour. Now, millet flour is an ancient grain that you see in a lot of Chinese cuisine. And if you want to find this really inexpensive, if you go to any Chinese grocery store, you will find millet, and you can just grind it in your blender or even like a spice meal to get it nice and fine like this. And I really do love it for gluten-free breads. You can also use other types of gluten-free whole grains, like buckwheat is really nice as well. So I'm just going to pop that in, along with our measurement of our sea salt. And you will notice that our batter has become very gelatinous. Now that's a combination of that psyllium husk and also the panis egg. And remember, we're looking to replace the gluten. So this is going to give some elasticity to our dough and hold on to that gas from the yeast. So just add all those wet ingredients into your dry. Now we're going to get these onto our mixers, and we just want to mix it until everything basically comes together, because we're not developing any gluten. The gluten-free batter is very easy to work with. It's very much like a cake, like a thick cake batter. Okay, so once everything is mixed thoroughly, we're just going to take these off. Now, something with gluten-free flour is it does take a little bit longer to hydrate, and we don't want like a grainy texture to our bread. So I always like to set these aside for about 15 minutes, just for that flour to start hydrating. And then we're going to give it one last mix before we do our first proof. Okay, so it's been 15 minutes. We've had our doughs hydrating so they can absorb all of that moisture. We're gonna get these back onto our mixers and mix them up for, like a couple of minutes, just to get everything nicely combined. So now that our doughs have all been mixed up, we're going to transfer them to an oiled bowl or container. So I'm just putting a bit of olive oil in here, or any kind of oil. And your dough is going to be very much like a cake batter. So that is completely normal. Now I like to get in there with either some wet hands or some oiled hands, and we're going to kind of create like a ball. Now we're just going to put some cling wrap over the top, and we're going to let these rise until they have doubled in size. And just depending on your ambient room temperature, this can take anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour. So I'm just going to set these aside on my bench, and then we'll be back when they have doubled in size. So our gluten-free pizza dough has been rising, and it's been probably like about 45 minutes. Now you can grab yourself a pizza pan. I don't have one, so I've just grabbed a large tray. But yeah, you can just use a sheet pan. And I'm going to brush my sheet pan with some olive oil. Now I'm just going to put a bit of oil onto my hands, because we want to get all of this air out now. So we're just going to deflate our dough. Now we're going to put it back into somewhat of a ball. And we're going to start shaping our pizza. So you can just use a little bit of oil on your hands so it doesn't stick. So once you're happy with your shaping, we're going to set this aside for about 20 minutes before. So I'm going to set this one aside and shape my next one. Okay, so we're going to set this one aside as well, so it can do its final proof. Now that our oven is preheated, we can par bake our gluten-free pizzas, which have been resting for about 20 minutes. And you would have noticed that they have puffed up a little more, so I'm going to pop these in my oven now and bake for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I've just taken my gluten-free pizza out of the oven and it's par baked at this stage. So this is the moment when we can start putting our toppings on. So if you're wanting to make your gluten-free pizza bases ahead of time, you can store these into the freezer. Just allow this to completely cool on the tray, remove it from the tray, and you can just wrap it up well with some cling wrap and pop it into the freezer. And then when you're ready to make your pizzas, you can just top it straight from frozen and then into the oven to finish off. So there you go, guys. That's our gluten-free. Nice and fluffy in the center and then nice and crispy on our crust. And I'm sure that you'll keep your wheat-free, gluten-free customers very happy with this one. So why don't you give it a try and let me know what you think.